Okay. I'm easy to get confused. Yes, Dave. You don't see anybody online, do you, Dave?
Dave, do you have anyone online?
He was talking to me earlier. From your seat? Yep. I didn't know the mics were that much.
Okay, sorry. I'm just trying to track down the agenda. There's your Zoom. Agenda, okay. All right, we ready? Okay. Thank you everyone for attending this month's Power Board meeting. I think right now we don't have anybody online, so we do have a quorum, and so we'll get started. So the first item is the approval of the agenda. Has everyone had a chance to look through tonight's agenda? Any questions, comments?
I'll make a motion that we approve the agenda.
I'll second.
Okay, Dick made the motion and Mark seconded. Dick, do you want to start us on a vote?
Aye.
Hauser, aye.
And Dinsmore, aye. Okay. The next item is the approval of the minutes. So again, any questions on the minutes?
Questions?
Okay.
I'll move to approve the minutes.
I'll second.
Okay, Mark, we start a vote.
Hauser, aye.
Saunders, aye.
And Dinsmore, aye. Okay. Like it when it goes fast like that. Turn it over to Rick for new business. And we've got,
Yeah, so this
is it down farther? Oh, that's the first item. Okay. First item is the new business is approving the meeting schedule, 3A. So, did everyone have a chance to look through that? I know one person asked me, is Tuesday nights the best nights? Do we want to move it?
I like Tuesday.
Tuesday?
It works well for me.
Okay. I know
Wednesday's out.
Yeah, I know there's certain days. Okay, well, all right. Any questions, comments, concerns on the meeting schedule?
Those are all just the first Tuesdays other than November conflicts with election day, so we typically cancel on that day.
Okay.
I'll move to approve the annual schedule for Power Board meetings.
I'll second.
Okay, Mark first, Dick second. So Mark, start a vote.
Hauser, aye.
Dick.
Saunders, aye.
And Dinsmore, aye. Okay. Rick, item 3B.
Okay. Don't ask me to, huh? Okay.
Oh, Todd's on Zoom now.
So we got
Okay.
Todd here. Welcome, Todd.
Hello. Sorry, I'm not there in person. I was running late from another meeting.
Okay. Glad to have you. This item is one that don't ask me tough questions because it's kind of a hard one to explain on some levels. But the basic idea is UAMPS is looking constantly at ways to save money. And they have proposed, call it a prepaid transaction. And what it does is, if you hopefully had a chance to look at the talking points that UAMP set out, which is the best part. So this first paragraph here kind of outlines something that's allowed in the IRS code, and basically it's a mechanism that you can take advantage of the difference between tax exempt bonding and taxable bonds. And those savings through the mechanism and the different parties, we're expecting to gain about a 7.5% discount on our natural gas that we bought for the Nebo plant. So right now this just applies to the Nebo project, which would translate about the $3 a megawatt hour. So it's not huge, but we'll take every little bit we can get. And there's also opportunity in the future that we can also assign like the Red Mesa and the Steel Solar output to run through this same prepay. So then there would be a similar 7% savings on those as well by doing that. So we have to have, the city has to use the output from those facilities, which is the qualifying use, which we will and do. Again, I'm not an expert on prepaid bonding. Certainly if you have questions that you're overly concerned about, we can get UAMPS to respond. But the talking points that were sent out, I think, are the best thing to kind of go by there. And what this resolution does is basically authorize the UAMPS representative to sign the documents when they get prepared, and they're anticipating sometime in Q1 of 2024 when this transaction would actually take place. So with that, probably not real detailed description. Do you have any questions? I don't know if Jeremy has any better insight on all the mechanisms there. It goes through like 2 or 3 different parties, and in the end we save money. So
I just didn't understand why we're being asked. I mean, what's the effect on the city? There's no financial detriment. There's only a positive thing for UAMPS.
Correct. Well, we hope to save, like I say, it's probably about $3 a megawatt hour out of the output from the Nebo plant on our portion of that. So that's the reason why. Well, the whole project has to do it. So the whole Payson project has to do it as a group. It's not like we could do it and Hurricane not or something like that. So it's all or nothing per project. And the same will when the Steel Solar and the Red Mesa come through. But they have to have, I think it's 3 months of output to demonstrate what it is before it can be put in. So there's Todd in the flesh. So that's the only motivation, only reason is to save some money. And right now I'm all for saving as much as we can. So.
Seems reasonable.
And I know they've had bond counsel and lots of lawyers and stuff look at it, and at some point I have to rely on their expertise on some of these transactions. So as outlined in the briefing document, if you're comfortable with it, it would be a recommendation to the city council, and actually it goes on the special council agenda tomorrow night to approve it. So
So then we don't have to do it again for another 30 years.
That's right. Long after I won't have to worry about the tail end of this.
Is there a determined rate that we're borrowing the money at? I don't see that in here.
It's tied to there's a expected the 7.5% minimum. If they aren't able to achieve that, then it doesn't go through.
Okay. So we're borrowing at 7.5, and that's why they're allowing the refinance.
So the 7.5% is the
dates.
savings.
That's our discount.
It is the savings we'll see on the gas purchase.
So on this stuff doesn't have what the rate is that we're borrowing the money at.
No.
Is that standard, Jeremy? Is that standard going to be what's interest rate that's given to cities most likely? Normally the cities have a pretty good borrowing rate when they do borrow on bonds like this.
But actually that's the mechanism, is the difference between the taxable bond rate and the tax exempt bond rate. That's where the saving is created. So it's not the actual rate. The 7.5% isn't an interest that we're paying. So if we were
It's the
paying
savings.
$100 a decatherm, we'd get it for $93.50. Did I do that right? No, $92.50. So we'll save 7.5% on our gas costs. Yes. And I didn't bring the whole real messy flow chart that they showed us, because I wouldn't be able to explain it. So. And I apologize. Like I say, I'm not maybe Todd knows more in the financial side of the world, but that's, like I say, it's a mechanism is outlined here that's allowed through the IRS code to be able to do that. And so the savings is created by the difference of the interest rates on those two. And if we don't get the 7.5%, it doesn't go through, and we're no worse off than we are now. So.
Yeah, I would imagine the powers that be at UAMPS know the ins and outs and would only do
Yes.
what's necessary, or
Yeah, and like I
improve
say,
that,
they've had bond counsel involved, the lawyers, all that kind of good stuff to make
Yeah.
sure we're protected and not put in a position that would be detrimental.
And what they're originally going to do is just that 5-year gas purchase is the first part of it.
For NEVO, yeah. And then you can add more to it as the other mechanisms are, like I say, on the steel solar, it hasn't been producing yet. So it has to produce for a while before it can be put in there. So.
Is there, I guess if, like you said, I guess if the savings isn't there, then we would stop doing it during the 30-year time frame.
Correct. And then I think it's a 7-year review reset. I thought that was here, or maybe it's in.
This is the amount of the discount will be reset periodically with the term repay every 5 to 10 years.
Okay.
And the bonds.
Yeah, so it's periodically looked at, and there's a potential we could save even more, but there is a ceiling or a low level that they've got to meet in order for it to go forward. And if 5 or 10 years down the road they can't meet that, then again, we're not obligated to stay in it. So.
Okay.
Well, I don't see a downside, so.
Yeah, so nothing changes between UAMPS and us, right?
No.
The interactions, it says.
Yeah, that's all those mechanisms are done at the UAMPS level. And all the power sales contracts through the PPAs or through the Payson Power sales contract allow for this kind of transaction to take place.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, is there a motion to forward this to the city council for their approval?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and make a motion that we recommend approval to the city council for a resolution authorizing a tax certificate agreement for UAMP's Payson Power Project and related matters.
I'll second.
Okay, Dave did the first, Mark did the second. Todd, would you start us on a vote?
Briggs, aye.
Dick,
Saunders, aye.
Mark,
Hauser, aye.
and Dinsmore, aye.
Thank you.
Okay, next, item 3C.
Okay, the next item is actually more, it's a funner one because it's more engineering graphs and stuff like that I like. Than all the financial stuff. At the end, usually at our October, the utilities that serve Washington County meet in the spring, typically in March, April, and in the fall, October-ish after the summer season. One to be ready for the upcoming summer, and then the other to evaluate, what happened, if there are any concerns. And so this report's done primarily led out by Rocky Mountain, but there's input from UAMPS, Deseret, Dixie, all the utilities. So last year, and so this is the 7 utilities total for Washington County last summer. The peak was just under 605 megawatts on July 21st between 5 and 6 p.m. And what does that mean? So that shows you from June 1st through the end of August what the loads were doing in the county every hour. And this is gross load, meaning it includes, they add the generation back in. And so it's, if no generation was down here, that's what it would look like. So gross is the total, net is if we look at just what's flowing on the system. And so this is a historical looking back, 22 years. You can see, 21 and 22 were almost identical. And then we went up about 15 megawatts this year over last year. So kind of keep that in mind, in the back of your mind as we go through, and we'll talk about temperatures and I guess what's your gut feel? Was last summer hotter or cooler than normal?
I thought it was cooler.
Yeah, compared to
significantly
the summer
cooler.
before, yeah. So
So we grew 15 megawatts as a county, at the same time having not extreme weather events. So this shows how that load, the 605 was broken up. The net load is the load that was flowing from Red Butte Central down into the county. The red is the generation. And then they did transfer a little bit of Tokerville onto the Cedar system because of some loading concerns on the line that feeds Purgatory. This one was actually kind of interesting, and it can show you, I think it demonstrates the potential volatility of what happens with some of the renewable resources, in this case, solar. So the yellow line is the sum of all the big solar plants up around the enterprise area. And there's, about 250 megawatts up there. It's pretty substantial. The blue line is what the load that flows through the transformers at Red Butte Central and on down to the county. And the gray line is what the gross load was at the time. Orange is the St. George big generators. And then the green one is the Deseret plant down in the Fort Pierce Industrial Park. It's about 15 megawatts. But what's kind of interesting to see in the early morning hours where load's down, solar's coming up, the net load through the transformer gets almost close to zero. Meaning that the solar is, and the other generation is packing the entire load. However, if you follow this through, the solar comes along, does its thing. Between 3 and 6 o'clock, there must have been a storm of some kind up through Enterprise area. So the solar drops off, and you can see the net load ramps up really fast to compensate for that. Where the gross load, you know, it's doing its thing, just gradually going along. But there's about, 150 megawatt swing when those clouds went by. Because normally the net load occurs later in the evening when the sun goes down, but in this case, because of that event, it actually happened a little bit earlier. So just kind of, you know, normally you'd see this yellow line just come across and drop off instead of this squiggle up and down. So, but the generation or the flow on the system has to make up for that when it goes away. And so I thought that was an interesting graph. Again, good engineering stuff. This graph, the 570 is the N-1 or the loss of one of the 3 transformer capacity at the Central Red Butte substations. What this is trying to show with our net load, we've got a little room to grow still. Keep in mind, this net load is down because of the solar typically. That swings 100 megawatts, it puts us above that. So could be interesting. So this gets into some of the temperature for last summer. The peak temperature day was actually July 16th, where our peak load day was July 21st. The peak temperature day, I believe, was on a Saturday or a Sunday, and that may be contributing why they didn't correlate the peak to the hottest temperature. But you can see we didn't have real long sustained heat events last summer. And I don't remember what they said these 35 and 6 means. I'm not exactly sure. Pardon? Oh, that's a good observation. I think you're probably right. So yeah, it stayed and then it crossed under and then reset to 5. Thank you. Cooling degree days is a measurement basically of how much your high temperature differs from about 65 degrees. You can see 2 years ago, we had the hottest summer. And then the last 2 years have been quite a bit less. With the average summer high temperature being the lowest it's been in the last 15 years or more. And then you compare, this is the average low temperature last year was considerably different than the previous 2 years. That doesn't sound like a lot, 4 degrees at night, but it really affects the load on how much heat is maintained in the area. And again, we're driven by air conditioning. And then this one it goes from 2007 to 23. If you look really close, this one line is highlighted here. Kind of has a little glow around it. And this is the number of hours that we were above 100 degrees, 101, 102. And you can see it was actually, it's like the second coolest over 100, or the second fewest numbers over 100 in that period. And then it kind of starts falling in the middle when you get into some of these higher ones. And then this is where things get really hot, you know, how many hours above 110, 111, 12, 13. So again, we had considerably less hours than many years over 110. And similar, this label here should be 2023. Again, it's the one that's kind of got the highlight on it. So it had a fairly good streak of over 100-degree days, but once we got a little bit over 100, it dropped really fast. Hey, Greg. This just shows what our original guesstimate of the load for the area was 635. It ended up being 605. However, I think if you had some of those heat events, it wouldn't take much to get there really fast. So there's a couple projects, and actually there's one on here that's not mentioned. That line I told you that they moved some load off of because of concern on the loading. There's a 2-mile section through the habitat from St. George Sub to basically where it crosses the freeway of the Rocky Mountain line. It has a smaller wire, and I think it's next week they're gonna take that line out of service and they'll be reconductoring that piece, so won't have that limitation next summer. So that'll give us a little more capacity on this side of the county. And then they'll also have the remedial action scheme, or this RAS, in place for next summer. And the next major upgrade to the area will be in 2026. Well, they'll actually energize one of the lines at 345,000 volts from Red Butte down to St. George and put a new transformer in at St. George Sub. So, quick summary, you know, the 605 was a 15 megawatt growth over 2022, even with temperatures below average. So it's always hard to predict what kind of boomerang you'll get. If we had a sustained period over 110 for, you know, 112, 13 for 2 or 3 days in a row, I would suspect you'd probably see another 20, 30 megawatts as a county, really without any real hesitation. This would have been like 13, 14 years ago when I was at St. George. We were able to see the load of the county on their SCADA system, and generally back then 1 degree resulted in about 10 megawatts of load. So if you could see the temperature go up, you could see it just kind of ratchet up. So we've had a lot of growth since the last 2012. So any questions on that? I mean, I guess I think it's just good to be aware of the system that feeds the county. You know, we're continually working with Rocky Mountain to make sure that we're adequately served. Of that 605 megawatts, their load's about 50, 60. So sometimes I don't feel like they give us the full attention that we deserve, even though we should be treated the same as far as native load or not. But so I think we'll be okay for next few years with some of the improvements. We'll talk about some of the looping, and when I get to the UAMPS report, that should help that as well. So, any questions on that? If you want some real fun reading, I can send you the actual report instead of just the graphs.
Do they, in any of their reporting, include the growth of the customers, the customer base growth? I know that we've got all the temperature data,
That's-
but obviously in the last 10 years, there's been extreme growth.
I mean, as far as customer numbers,
Users, yeah, because I
that-
would think
that's not in this.
affects demand.
Right, and that's where you see, if we go back to, I think where that really shows up is this historical one.
Mhm.
You can
Well,
see,
you can see the trend lines, but I was just curious if they do any charting as far as understanding the growth of the area. If the area, if we go into a recessionary period and growth slows, well, then in theory, we're not gonna have to worry
And-
about higher peaks or
and-
greater.
and how this, they call it the load and resource forecast that each entity has to submit. So we submit and work with UAMPS for ours. And they give an UAMPS aggregate. Deseret does it with Dixie and Garcane for there. And then the Rocky Mountain commercial side does theirs. And that's where these projections come from. And so each individual submit it to Rocky Mountain and say, this is what we think our load is anticipated. So it's not just, a fixed percentage. You end up going through all that, and then you boil it down to a 3 and 4% average growth, which is actually for electrical system is pretty high.
Yeah, I
I
would
mean, it
think.
doesn't sound like a lot, but it is actually a pretty high growth rate. Most places are like 1.5. So. Any other questions? Well, this is more just informative,
Mhm.
what's going on the system. Clear as mud? No takers on the main report, huh?
Nah.
But that shows you basically the service area, and actually it includes the Littlefield area. Dixie serves that, and so the line does serve down into Littlefield, Arizona a little bit as well.
Okay. No questions? Okay, on to item 4, regular business, operations and
Okay,
generation
we'll do
update.
just a quick review on, I guess we didn't have a meeting in November, so this is kind of a little bit of 2-month summary. In September, the PCA did go down for the 3rd time in a row, which is good. However, last month it went back up just a little, it's a little over 0.5 cent down in September and 0.2 cents back up in October. November, I'm anticipating it to be about flat. And then December, January, think we should be able to beat the power prices we paid a year ago in those 2 months. So I'm hoping to see that come back down a little bit in January or December and January bills when they come through. So again, the PCA is doing what it's supposed to do, kind of monitors those power costs and adjusts accordingly. Our October peak was 27.6 megawatts, which previous year was about 29.8, so we're a little down on that. November was 17.3 and last year was 17.2, so basically the same. Again, highly temperature dependent on what those loads are. As some of you know, Mike Roosh, who was leading our development side and working with the developers, he moved to Missouri, so he's no longer with the department. We wish him well. We miss him and his abilities. We've held interviews, and Bruce working with the candidates to get somebody on board. I'm hoping within the next, hopefully at least by the end of the year, we'll have somebody filling that position. So in the meantime, between, I think everybody in the department's kind of taken on different pieces to make that happen as best we can to cover that whole It is the off season, so we really don't have any generation planned, unless there was a reason to need it system wise, or if somebody would want to pay us a whole bunch to run, we could, but we don't anticipate any runs probably until next spring. If you've been out and about, I'm sure you have seen the UDOT project on Main Street here, and we just actually finished up today one of the distribution line relocation segments that we've been working with the UDOT contractor. They put in the conduit, our crews installed the wire, and then we'll continue. We've got on that project, we have 2 more transmission poles to set, a little bit of underground, and then next week they'll be digging pretty close to one of our poles. So you'll see, we'll de-energize what we can on the pole, and we're gonna chain a track hoe to the one pole just to give it some extra support while they do that work until they get the retaining wall up that will support it long term. So we're probably at least 2/3 through that project as far as we're concerned, and the improvements we have to make to accommodate that. On the AMI, we had interviews, I guess, with them just after Thanksgiving, and Dick was able to sit in on those. I don't know if you want to report on anything, or
I just found that all the companies that submitted were competent, I would say. I had my favorites, but everybody did a review process, and I presume that Rick accumulated those, and I don't know whether my thoughts were similar to others, but
I think
I think there
were,
was some standouts.
Yeah, and as Dick said, the good news is we've got 4 good vendors. I think any of them would work. And to be honest, with some of the things with Mike leaving, that hasn't helped expand time to be able to dig into that. And so I'm in the kind of the middle of going through that evaluation, and hopefully can be able to present that to you and the council here in the next month or so, of which direction we'd like to proceed. So, but it has been an interesting, more difficult process, because company A does this really well and B does this a little different and maybe not quite as well, but they do this better than the company A, and it's not quite as apples. It's more apples and oranges, and trying to figure things out. Jake's working on last spring, when we put Main Street back together and got it back online, we had to do some temporary things because we couldn't get all the final parts. The DC breaker panel was one of those, so we temporarily put in some fuses. He's in the process of working on that, and we'll complete our SCADA checks. So right now our Main Street sub is offline, and hopefully in the next couple of weeks we will have that back online, so we can take the Parkway sub offline, so we can do the transmission work for the UDOT project. So there's a lot of load that gets shifted around, and if we do our job right, nobody knows that we're doing that. So on our solar applications, we had 15 in October and 11 in November, so we've staying between 10 to 15 a month the last several months. And we have talked about the pole attachment policy. We're pretty much done as the department review. Rachel's got those edits made, and I've got to work with UFS on redoing the rate And so there's some work that I gotta do there with them. And so that's really the missing piece, is what the final rate will be. And there wasn't any real substantial changes from what was previously presented, but when we get it finalized, we'll bring it back for a vote or recommendation to the council. As far as outages goes, we had two. One, a dump truck. I don't know why dump trucks seem to like to drive around with their bed up, but they do. And they pulled down lines. It could have been much worse than it was. I guess fortunately it was a smaller neutral, and it actually broke and let it kind of release the tension instead of keep pulling it down. And then we had a intoxicated individual on Industrial Drive that completely took out one pole and damaged the other and went through a tree. And I guess the good news is him and his buddies walked away.
Right.
But their car was seriously messed up. But so those were the two main outages. We've had a couple onesie twosies here and there, connector fail or something like that. But those were the two bigger ones. But the crews have both of those repairs done and completed. And so that's the general system. I don't know if you have any questions. We actually just energized the second phase of Solcius and down the new road today. So things go right and the lights should be on that road. I don't know when they're going to officially open it, but we had to find some parts to help out the contractor to get that up and going. And so the crews are busy and trying to keep the lights on. Any questions on that? We can move on to the UAMP stuff. The UAMP's annual meeting will be next week up in Salt Lake. We continue to evaluate, shorter term, longer term power purchases, gas purchases. I am pleased to let you know we were able to secure for June through September a 5-year gas purchase for the plant, a similar run pattern to what we did this past year at $5.80 a decatherm. This last year we paid $8. So, and the years before that was even higher than that. So, there's a chance gas could be higher or lower than that, but it does give us a good, reasonable, stable number to count on. And that puts the run about in the $70 range, mid 70s. So about 7 cents a kilowatt hour. We still probably will do a small purchase for the summer. The last pricing we got seemed a little bit high, so we're kind of waiting to figure out when to pull that trigger will be the best. So we're working with UAMPS to see what those opportunities are. The only other thing on the Central St. George project, like I mentioned, we're looking at right now all the 138 kV lines run radially. We're looking at looping those together to where they'd run in closed loop. That improves reliability, but it complicates system operation. If you've got 3 or 4 different entities, lines all tied together, it gets a little more complicated. One of the things we have to do is, or would like to get, is a bulk electric system exemption, because usually when you loop like that, it puts all this federal requirements and baggage on you. And since it's just a local area, the consultant feels like that we can have a good shot at getting that exemption. Again, what that does, it really is makes it simpler and saves money. A lot of it's just documentation stuff that you have to do. So that's been submitted to the North American Electrical Reliability Council, or NERC. And I don't know how long that process will take. I'm guessing it'll be a few months. But we're hoping to be able to operate closed loop, not this summer, but following summer. So Nebo plant's been running really well. Again, with the gas purchase we made for that plant, it runs pretty much 24/7. It goes down to about 80 megawatts at night, and then will vary between 105 and 130 based on load needs. We came out of the fall outage much better than last year. I don't know if you remember, but at the October outage, they found major problems and we didn't get it back till I think it was mid-January. So it was out 3.5, 4 months. This time there wasn't any surprises. It was about just a little over a 2-week outage. And they just do periodic maintenance. They do it in October and April. So that was really good news. Vail continues to run. Challenge there is it just depends on what Kern River's doing on their gas compressor. October wasn't great, but right now it's back up and running. As you can imagine, with the cooler temperatures, they're compressing more gas. So one interesting thing that they did at last month's, or Mike Squires arranged for at our last meetings, we actually had Congressman Curtis zoom in, and it was interesting to hear his take on some stuff. Overall, I think he has a pretty good handle on some of the concerns of, base load resources, renewables, and EVs. And so he presented, and he's on one of the energy committees. So he's in a good position to, I think, watch out for some of our needs. On our solar projects, Red Mesa's doing well. Of course, this time of year, we're getting less because there's less hours of light, which fits our load. So it's working well that way. On the steel solar, it got moved out, the first phase to February and the second phase in May, which I know some of them the members are probably more frustrated than we are, but we had made a Q1 purchase. So it actually fits how we pre-bought some power a little better. So I'm not too upset if it doesn't go beyond what they're showing now. So for future resources, and this kind of ties into the CFPP we'll talk about here in just a minute. We're hoping to get the term sheets on a geothermal project. They're looking at natural gas projects, expanding our wind in Idaho, and a couple different solar projects that look promising. They've done a study and they had a consultant come in, and it's interesting. One of the biggest challenges on these projects is you have to get a large generator interconnect agreement with like Rocky Mountain Power, Nevada Power, Idaho Power, whoever it might be. Some of those entities, I think it was Idaho, isn't even taking an application until Q2 of 2025. And then it takes them about a year to do the study. So from now, you'd be like 2 years plus to even find out if you can interconnect. And so it's not as simple as say, I want to go build a project and I want to connect to that line. So one of the things they've pivoted a little bit, and I think it's a good strategy, is to identify and work with projects that may be already down that path. They've identified a couple that either have the agreement in place or is in the queue to get that study work done, so we could get it online quicker. And then after, if you waited to those 2 years and then you develop the project after that, it becomes a 4 or 5 year process to get something online. And that's just the the solars that everybody says are just so easy to just go build them and plug them in. Not quite as easy. Probably the last and the main one, I assume everybody got all the information in early November about the CFPP has been terminated at this point. And pretty much the talking points that were set out is really what can be said or discussed. And what these talking points were agreed upon between UAMPS and NuScale. And the biggest challenge was this second sentence here where it says most prospective subscribers were unwilling to take on risks associated with developing a first kind of nuclear project. And so that was, I guess, the Achilles heel of it is there were a lot of people interested, but only if somebody would guarantee them the prices wouldn't go up or there wouldn't be, they wanted to guarantee this is what it was. And there's certainly no way UAMPS could guarantee that, NuScale, and at that point, still I say the only gorilla big enough to do something like that would have been the federal government, and weren't able to make that happen either. So that's really the main thing that was the driving force in doing that, because we had set as UAMPS basically the end of the year to get that subscription, and it became clear that that just wasn't going to happen. And so in an effort to minimize costs, they decided to, instead of waiting until January 1st to do it, they did it second week in November. In fact, I was on a call, when I flew to Florida. I got to the motel and started that call about 10 minutes later. So it was a little surprising it came that quick, but I think in the end, it's as good of outcome as we can get. Then the main thing, NuScale has already paid the 48 or 49. Oh, Dave, did I lose my sharing? Sorry, I'm here pointing. There we go. Sorry about that. So again, that first paragraph, I think, of the project status is really the nutshell of why it was terminated. But NuScale has paid just under $50 million to UAMPS, which is 100% of the reimbursable costs. And then they've set up a mechanism that you can imagine a project of that size, they've got to wind it down somehow. There are assets, be it work product or they had started at the foundry, the making of the containment. So there are some tangible assets as well. And so they got to work through that, who gets that and at what cost and all that kind of good stuff. So there will be some non-reimbursable costs that were outside of the NuScale agreement that we'll be responsible for. I don't know what those amounts are at this point in time. And I'm hoping next week they'll be able to shed a little more light on that. So it's unfortunate. It's one of those, I felt like it's a really good project, and I think is needed for the system, not only just UAMPS, but the system as a whole. I just couldn't get all the pieces to come together at this point in time. So, and then they did identify some of the things that hopefully will help other projects that follow, as far as working with the NRC. That was going very well. The project was on target to have the COLA ready in January. So unfortunately, just wasn't able to get it all to come together. So then they did have several bullet points here. It's kind of what we talked about. You know, we're looking at all kinds of other resources to fill those needs. I'm sure power purchase agreements is going to be part of what we need to help cover that. And UAPS is almost done with an integrated resource plan, which will identify the needs for UAPS as a whole. And then they will work with us individually on what their consultant sees that each city needs to have in their portfolio. So any questions? And all I'm going to be able to say is pretty much what's in these talking points. So we don't want to say anything that would compromise our ability to maintain that reimbursement. So anyway, that's kind of my report this month. And again, I don't know what questions you may have or on this or any other, but would have been fun to see happen.
Do you have any information on that geothermal that they're investigating?
It's located in Nevada, and we're hoping it would be in the between $70 to $80 a megawatt range. Part of the challenge with some of that is it's not on Rocky Mountain system, so they call it a pancake rate. We might have to pay Nevada a transmission rate to get it to Rocky Mountains, and then pay the Rocky Mountain one on top of that. So,
but it's an existing facility, or is it some future date?
There's both components potentially, part of an existing and part of a new greenfield. So,
well, they're going to have to find something somewhere.
And the advantage of that one is it would hopefully be more of a baseload type product. So, and the solars that we're looking at would also include at least a 4-hour battery, which would really help take some of that early morning power that we don't need and shift it to the evening where we could use it more effectively. Because we need the sun to shift to better match our load and just a little better. It's about a 4-hour shift is what we need. Not sure what we do the other 12 hours of the day, but hopefully the load comes down. So yeah, we're taking all of the above approach, looking at any and every opportunity that we can find to help fill our needs. And I am excited to have the steel solar come on next year. I think that will help and give us, while it's not a base load product, it does give us some more cost-effective kilowatt hours on a lot of the hours that we haven't had access to before.
Any other questions?
Well, you were easy on me. Thank you.
Okay. Last item is adjournment. Motion to adjourn.
I'll go ahead and motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
Todd first and Dick second. So Mark, would you start us on a vote?
Hauser, aye.
Todd?
Aye.
Dick?
Saunders, aye.
And Dinsmore, aye. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Till next month, which is on
January 2nd. So don't party too much on the 1st. So. Well, I guess you party on the 31st, so it'll be
You'll
okay.
have the day to relax. We'll talk about the football games. Okay, thank you, everyone. We'll see you then.